Moses did not flee Egypt. Let this sink in for a second. Everything they taught you about Moses, he didn't run away like everyone thinks. This may be based on an incomplete interpretation of biblical story. That man who killed an Egyptian, who crossed the desert, who spent 40 years herding sheep, he wasn't running away. He was being prepared. And in the next few minutes you'll find out the truth about Moses that changes everything. Why he actually left Egypt. What happened during those silent years in the desert of Midian? And most importantly, what was God's plan from the beginning? Because here's what nobody told you. The burning bush wasn't the beginning of the story. It was merely the moment when Moses finally understood what God had already been doing in his life all along. And at the end of this video, I'm going to show you how that same truth applies to the deserts you're crossing right now. Because sometimes what seems like escape is actually destiny. So stay with me until the end. This revelation will change the way you see not only Moses, but your own journey. Let's start by debunking a myth. Most people believe that Moses fled Egypt, like a desperate criminal, running for his own skin after killing an Egyptian. That's the superficial version, the version that completely ignores what the scriptures actually reveal about that moment. Because if you read Exodus 2 carefully, you'll notice something unsettling. Moses didn't sneak out in the middle of the night. He left because Pharaoh was trying to kill him, yes. But the text says that Moses fled from the presence of Pharaoh and went to live in the land of Midian. It doesn't say he fled from God. It doesn't say he fled from his calling. He fled from a tyrant. And here's the part that bothers a lot of people. Why did God allow Moses to kill that Egyptian? Why does this act of violence appear right before his deepest spiritual journey? Was God testing him, or was this the exact moment when the prince of Egypt needed to die so that the liberator of Israel could be born? The answer is hidden between the lines of biblical story of Moses, and when you discover it, everything changes. Because Moses wasn't fleeing Egypt, he was being dragged out of there. And the difference between those two things is what separates cowardice from obedience. But before we get there, you need to understand who Moses really was, because the truth about his identity explains everything. Imagine the scene. Marble halls gleaming under the desert sun, servants rushing to and fro, the sound of harps echoing through the palace corridors. And in the midst of it all, a young man with dark eyes, dressed in the finest clothes of the empire, but with a broken heart. Moses, the young prince of Egypt, he knew he didn't belong there. He had been raised as the son of Pharaoh's daughter, educated in the finest schools, trained in the arts of war and politics. But inside him, a truth burned like fire. He was not Egyptian. He was Hebrew. And his people were being crushed under the whip of slavery right there, outside the golden walls of the palace. Acts 7:22 tells us that Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in words and deeds. He had everything, power, privilege, a guaranteed future, but he carried a restlessness that no throne could cure, because when you know the truth about who you are, living a lie becomes unbearable. And then came the day when he left the palace and saw with his own eyes. He saw the sweat running down the faces of his Hebrew brothers. He saw their backs marked by whips. He saw the contempt in the eyes of the Egyptian overseers, and something inside him broke. Have you ever felt like this? Living in a place where everyone thinks you should be happy, but deep down, you know there's something bigger waiting for you? Moses was trapped between two worlds. The palace that created him and the people who awaited him. And this tension was about to explode in a way that would change everything. Because what happened next wasn't an accident. It was the trigger. Exodus 2:11-12 records the moment with a disturbing coldness. In those days, when Moses had grown up, he went out to his brothers and saw their hard labor. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brothers. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Let's pause here, because this scene is controversial. Moses killed a man, And many people use this to say that he was impulsive, violent, immature. But is that really true? The Bible doesn't romanticize this act, nor does it directly condemn it. What it does is show that Moses saw injustice and acted. Hebrews 11:24-25 says that by faith Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. So here's the inconvenient truth. That Egyptian was torturing an innocent Hebrew. And Moses, moved by a sense of justice and mercy, he intervened. It wasn't a cold-blooded murder, it was an act of self-defense. It was the moment when the Prince of Egypt chose his side. But here's the problem. Moses was still operating with human strength. He still thought he could liberate his people with his own hands, and God needed to shatter that illusion completely. Therefore, what happened next wasn't punishment. It was redirection. The next day, Moses tried to intervene in another fight, this time between two Hebrews, and one of them said something devastating. "Who appointed you a ruler and judge over us? Are you planning to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Exodus 2:14. Moses realized that his secret had been discovered, and more than that, he realized that his own people did not recognize him as their liberator. That's when everything fell apart, and that's when the real training began. Here's where most people completely miss the mark. They look at Exodus 2:15. When Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses, but Moses fled from the presence of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and conclude that he was running away in fear. But what if I told you that this Moses' escape was his first act of obedience to God's plan? Think about it. Moses had just tried to liberate Israel in his own way, brute force, taking justice into his own hands, and he failed miserably. His people rejected him. Pharaoh wanted his head. He was alone, exposed, without allies. If he had stayed in Egypt, he would have been executed. And then what? The story ended. No Exodus, no liberation, no Moses. But God had other plans. Moses' purpose. It wasn't about dying as a rebel in Egypt. It was about being molded in the desert of Midian. Because the desert is where God breaks proud men and rebuilds humble leaders. And look how interesting. When Moses arrived in Midian, he wasn't received as a fugitive. He was received as a liberator. Exodus 2:17 says that he defended Reuel's daughters from aggressive shepherds. Once again, justice. Once again, protection of the weak. Moses didn't change his character. He changed schools of thought. Before we continue, I need to ask you something quick. If this content is making sense to you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel, because there are many people who need to hear this truth, and you can help by sharing it. Now go back, because the best is yet to come. So here's the revelation. Moses did not run away. He was sent. God used Pharaoh's threat to take Moses out of Egypt and lead him into the desert, because the man who would liberate Israel could not be formed in the palaces of Egypt. He needed to be stripped of everything, emptied of himself, reduced to nothing. And that is exactly what happened in Midian. 40 years. Let that number weigh on your mind. Moses spent 40 years in the desert of Midian. 40 years herding sheep. 40 years away from power, away from glory, away from everything he knew. Acts 7:29-30 summarizes this phase with a silent brutality. Because of this word, Moses fled and lived as a foreigner in the land of Midian, where he had 2 sons. After 40 years had passed, an angel appeared to him in the desert of Mount Sinai. 40 years of silence, 40 years of anonymity. The man who was a prince of Egypt now tended dirty sheep. The man who was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians now conversed with animals. The man who wanted to liberate a nation now could barely support his own family. And here is what God was doing: spiritual transformation, because Moses needed to learn something fundamental before facing Pharaoh. He needed to learn that it wasn't about him. It never was. It never would be. The desert teaches what no palace can teach: humility, dependence, and patience. In Egypt, Moses had power. In Midian, he had nothing, and it was precisely there that God began to build the leader that Israel needed, because the kind of leader God uses isn't one who relies on their own strength. It's one who knows that without God, they are nothing. And the lessons from the life of Moses, the lessons God wants to teach you today, are the same ones you experience in that desert. Silence is not abandonment. The desert is not punishment. Sometimes it's exactly where you need to be to hear God's voice. And when Moses was finally ready, the voice came. Exodus 3:1-2. Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. He led the flock to the far side of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. Imagine the scene. Just another ordinary day, just another tiring journey through the desert. More sheep to tend. And then fire, but not just any fire. A fire that burned without destroying. An impossible fire. And from within that fire, a voice. "Moses, Moses!" And he replied, "Here I am." Moses and the burning bush, it wasn't just a mystical encounter. It was the moment when everything made sense. 40 years of silence, 40 years of preparation, 40 years of brokenness, all for this moment, because now, finally, Moses was ready to listen. God said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." Exodus 3:6. And then came the revelation. "I have indeed seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry. Therefore come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt." Exodus 3:7-10. Wait, was God saying that he saw the affliction, that he heard the cry? Then where was he for the last 40 years? The answer is startling. He was preparing the liberator, because God doesn't work on human time. He doesn't rush. He doesn't improvise. Those 40 years weren't a waste. They were a learning experience. And Moses was called by God. Exactly when it was ready. Not before, not after, at the right time. But there's a detail that most people ignore. Moses didn't rush off to Egypt full of excitement. In fact, he resisted. Exodus 3:11. "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" That's Moses' answer, and it's one of the most honest statements in the entire Bible, because he wasn't feigning humility. He truly believed he wasn't capable. 40 years in the desert had crushed every last vestige of self-confidence, and God responded with something powerful. "I will be with you." Exodus 3:12. Not "you are capable," not "you are strong," but "I will be with you." And that is the difference. Moses continued to resist. "They won't believe me." Exodus 4:1. "I don't speak well." Exodus 4:10. "Send someone else." Exodus 4:13. Every excuse was legitimate. Every fear was real. But none of them changed the fact that God had chosen Moses. And here's the brutal lesson that bothers a lot of people. God doesn't choose who is ready. He chooses whom he wants, and then prepares them. Moses was an unlikely leader, stuttering, insecure, marked by failure. But that was precisely why God chose him. Because when Moses finally confronted Pharaoh, no one could say it was Moses' strength that freed Israel. It would be obvious to everyone. It was God. And this leads to a question you need to answer. What if God is calling you to something impossible? What if your weaknesses aren't disqualifications, but precisely the reason he chose you? What if what you call inability, God calls dependence? Moses had courage and faith, but not in the way we imagine. He didn't trust himself. He trusted God despite himself. And that's what made him one of the greatest leaders in history. But one thing was still missing. He needed to go back. Exodus 4:19-20. The Lord said to Moses in Midian, "Go back to Egypt, for all those who were trying to kill you are dead." So Moses took his wife and his sons, put them on a donkey, and went back to Egypt. Think about how courageous that is. Moses was returning to the place from which he had fled 40 years earlier, returning to face the Pharaoh, returning to confront the most powerful empire in the world. But now he wasn't going as a rebellious prince. He was going as a man chosen by God. And when he arrived, something extraordinary happened. Moses and Pharaoh met face to face, the former prince and the king, the shepherd and the ruler of Egypt. And Moses spoke the boldest words ever spoken to any human ruler. "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go." Exodus 5:1. Pharaoh laughed. He mocked. This hardened his heart. But Moses did not back down, because now he was not operating with human strength. He was operating with divine authority. And what came next? The 10 plagues, the Passover, the parting of the Red Sea was proof that Moses was the man chosen by God. But here's the part that ties it all together. Moses wouldn't have achieved any of this if he had stayed in Egypt. He needed to leave. He needed the desert. He needed Midian, because the leader who returned to Egypt was completely different from the prince who had left. And this is where the truth explodes in your face. Here is the biblical truth that changes everything. Moses did not flee Egypt. He was taken from there to be prepared. God wasn't reacting to Moses' mistake. God was orchestrating his training. That dead Egyptian wasn't an accident that God had to fix. It was the trigger God used to take Moses out of an environment that limited him and lead him to a place where he could break him down and rebuild him. Think about it. If Moses had stayed in Egypt, he would have been executed or would have remained a prince. In either case, Israel would have remained enslaved. But God had a better plan, a plan that involved the desert, silence, humiliation, spiritual transformation. And here are the little-known revelations about Moses, things that need to be said. He did not kill the Egyptian on impulse. He saw injustice and acted with imperfect justice, but with a right heart. He didn't run away out of cowardice. He left because staying would have meant premature death and an aborted mission. He didn't spend 40 years in the desert by chance. Each year was a year of preparation. He wasn't called by the burning bush because he was ready. He was called because God was ready to use him. So when you look at the whole story, the question changes. It's not, why did Moses run away? It's, why did God need to take him away from there? And the answer is simple, because palaces don't create liberators. Deserts do. And if you think this is just about Moses, you've completely missed the point. Because here is what God wants you to understand. The desert you are going through right now may be exactly where God is preparing you for something you can't even imagine. Maybe you left a place that seemed safe. Maybe you made mistakes that shame you. Maybe you've been living in silence for years, feeling forgotten, invisible, useless. And you look back and think, I ran away, I failed, it's over. But what if I told you that you didn't run away? What if you were sent? What if God is using exactly what you call failure to break you, empty you, prepare you? The lessons from the life of Moses. These aren't just ancient stories. They're a mirror for our journey. God continues to do the same thing today. He takes people out of comfortable places. He allows them to go through arid deserts. He lets them be reduced to nothing. And then, when they finally stop trusting in themselves and start trusting in Him, then He acts. Proverbs 3:5-6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your path straight." Moses relied on his own understanding when he killed the Egyptian, and he failed. But when he trusted God at the burning bush, he freed an entire nation. The difference wasn't in his ability, it was in whom he was trusting. So the question I leave you with is, who are you trusting? In your own strength, in your own wisdom, or in God, who knows exactly what He is doing even when it seems like everything is falling apart? Because if Moses taught us anything, it is this: God does not waste deserts. He uses them to transform fugitives into liberators. So here is the final truth, the one I promised at the beginning. Moses never ran away. He was prepared, and you too may be being prepared right now, at this very moment, for something that will change your life and the lives of many people around you. Don't give up on the desert. Don't give up on the silence. Don't give up when it seems like God is far away, because He may be closer than ever, shaping you for a purpose that has not yet been revealed. If this video touched something deep within you, I need you to do 3 things right now. First, leave a comment telling me what the biggest revelation you had while watching it was. Second, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos. And third, share this video with someone who needs to hear that the desert isn't the end, it's the beginning. Why the spiritual significance of Moses, it doesn't end with him. It continues in us. We are all called. We are all prepared. We are all part of a greater plan. And remember, God didn't call you because you are capable. He called you because He is faithful. And that changes everything. Stay in peace. And until the next video, may God bless you.